Hey, what's up guys? In this video I'm going to be talking about why I actually made the switch from originally shooting with Canon cameras, switching over to Sony mirrorless, why I made those changes, and how it might help you decide what kind of gear to buy the next time around. Coming up. Hey, what's up guys, and welcome into this video. In this video we're going to be specifically talking about why I decided to switch from Canon on one hand, switching over to Sony on the other, and ultimately deciding that Sony was going to be the camera that I was going to be using for landscape photography. Before we get into this, I just want to say if you're into landscape photography at all, if you like cameras, if you like technology, post-processing, how to create a great photo, subscribe to this channel because it's really going to help you dial in on becoming a better photographer, and that's what we all want anyways. When I first started out in landscape photography, I really used the gear within my budget, and starting out that was a Canon just entry-level package deal, and that's like the Canon Rebel series that came with a zoom wide angle lens to mid-range lens, and then also I think it was like a 55 to, I don't know, 210 or something like that. It was a telephoto zoom lens that came with it. Ultimately, that served me well for a really long time, and I probably used it longer than I should have just because I knew the camera, I knew the menu, I knew the technology, and I really did like Canon products. But then, once Sony came into the picture, I started looking at what Sony was doing, and also what Canon was doing, because it was time to upgrade to a new camera, and I was really faced with a dilemma here. Do I stay with Canon or do I switch to another maker, which would have been Sony? So let's think about this in terms of the conflict here. Number one, sticking with Canon is ultimately going to save you money in the short term. And how do I rationalize that? Well, I already had a Canon camera. I had two Canon lenses. I had bought a third Canon lens that was better than the first two. So I had a good lens setup with Canon lenses. So ultimately, switching to a different camera company would have cost me more money in the short term because I didn't have any of the lenses for Sony products. So I was kind of weighing this option of, okay, do I buy a new camera for Canon or do I buy a whole new setup, camera and lenses with Sony? Now you may be thinking, okay, you went with Canon obviously because that would have saved you money, but looking at it in the long term, we're talking micro and macro decisions here. Micro decisions is saving money in the short term. Macro is improving your technology for long-term success, where you may have to spend some extra money in the short term. So I switched to Sony because of the things they were doing with their technology. They were making smaller, faster, more compact cameras that were built with more technology within them. Even though that meant spending more on the gear, I was getting more in turn for the long term because of what that company was doing. So Canon was really lacking in that. While Sony was making a name for itself in the technology of mirrorless systems and technology of future for landscape photography, I saw Canon staying stagnant. They were charging more for their products and putting less of that technology into the cameras. So I was kind of weighing these options. I went with Sony because of that long-term success option. I think when you're making the decision to switch to a different company or switch to these things, you have to think about, I'm not only switching cameras, I'm switching lenses, I'm investing in lenses for long term because we're ultimately buying camera bodies faster than we are investing in lenses. So which lenses are better? How many lenses does that camera mount have for each camera body that I come up with? I'm using a Sony E-mount camera, so I'm buying E-mount lenses. For an APS-C camera, how many lenses do I have specifically within that range of technology that I'm using? And then lastly, what is that company doing? Do I see them charging more money for less, or do I see them charging less money or adequate money for the product for more technology? Ultimately, Sony was doing that, has continued to do that. And I don't think it's really going out on a limb that I think Canon is really going to hurt from this in the long term business-wise, because Sony has implanted themselves as the leader in mirrorless camera technology. Other cameras have come up with that, you know, Panasonic, Fuji have really made strides in the mirrorless game. Now recently you see Canon and Nikon jumping into that. However, Sony has supplanted itself so firmly and taking a gamble on that in the beginning of mirrorless technology, saying, hey, this is where the future is with cameras, technology, and photography. We're going to jump all in on this. And it paid off big time, because now they're the leader in the industry in that genre. Some photographers haven't switched over to mirrorless, which is 100% fine if you're still using DSLR technology. Canon and Nikon make absolutely tremendous cameras within that realm, and I do think they're the two leading manufacturers in DSLR still. However, if you're going with mirrorless, it's probably going to be Sony. That's ultimately why I switched to a new camera company, and giving you some thought and food for thought on, if you're making the switch, why should you make one switch over another, or why should you think about one camera company over another versus price, technology, what you get in the short term and what you get in the long term.